Okay, we'll get the microphone down here where I can reach it. What we're doing this evening is kind of, it's sort of open mic. I called for volunteers and I took the first 8 or 9 people that checked in with me. There were a couple of cancellations and they were really sorry to do so, so I latched onto a couple of more people. So we'll run with about 5 to 7 minutes for each person. And so what we're looking for, of course, is Bill Kloefkorn poems or poems that you've written about Bill. Stories about Bill. We know there's probably more stories than we can fill in 24 hours as far as that goes. So that's going to be a fine thing. I think my wife got here with a picture I forgot to bring. I love all the pictures that I've had over the years of Bill, and I put together kind of a collage of Bill Kloefkorn pictures. So we'll hang that up for you to look at and get inspired.
Got a little wet.
Got a little wet. Here's what it looks like. There, we've got Bill watching us right now. So, I've got a whole list of people. Do I have anyone on that list that wants to be first? I see. Got a volunteer. Nancy Savery, I think. You're outdueled, Paul. Nancy Savery.
Volunteered first. We had 2 appointments today, so I'm really dragging about now. One thing I remember at a reading one time, Bill said, "Never let schooling interfere with your education." I didn't know Bill. I didn't know Bill personally. Okay. In the 2011 issue of Nebraska Life, I was very honored. And I saw Eloise with a church friend about, 3 or 4 months ago. And I said, "Eloise, I wrote a poem about Bill." And she said, "I'd sure like to see it." So I sent it, of course, to the wrong address first. And then I think it finally got to you. But this was from Nebraska Life. It's called Bill. He made the successful leap from Hansen to Nebraskan, ever the loyal Midwesterner, reminding us to consider cottonwoods, ponds, blue stem, rivers, and sunflowers. He has been central to our lives all these years. Teacher, poet, mentor, gentle critic, lover of history, with a sparkle in his eye to accompany a clever tongue-in-cheek or turn of phrase. The steady baritone voice flowed so resonantly that it was immediately recognizable, and we knew there was a splendid story to follow. He urged us to acknowledge the lives we live, but to not regard matters too seriously, to keep an eye on the finish in his own noble metaphors and words, and remember him simply as Bill. One of my all-time favorites, and we just passed through Paxton last week, Ole's Big Game Lounge. Remember that? And I even have postcards of it from 1980, so I'll pass them across. It helps you understand the poem. And Bill calls it a poem of place. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Ole's Big Game Lounge in Paxton, Nebraska is an anecdote listening at the keyhole to catch the wind of its last line. Say that it all began with the head of an antelope that overlooks the shine on the bottoms of Ole's chipped obedient beer mugs. How that very same set of antelope eyes looked up one early morning and straight into the blue dewy barrel of Ole's most recent, most uncontested rifle. Say that Ole, whose fingertips had made, say, most gentle love the night before, Squeeze the trigger into sweet sulfuric flak, into the instant snap and buckle of broken knees. And say that it continued the leap of the cougar at the soft distended neck of the doe, both now arrested in pursuit and in flight on a platform of unpainted pine, rigged by the purple thumbs of Ole's faithful henchmen. To note the size and shape and sharpness of the cougar's teeth, red as if chiseled stone, the dark, dilated pupils of the doe that dies and lives, escaping, while the cougar, sleek as a long-winded runner, shall always be about to do its share of deadly cutting down and dying. And say that on and on and on and on it rambled, scorn on the black, belated nose of the lesser kudu, the shin of the gazelle so far, so fast from home, no sign, no map, no holy star. A pheasant on his last stilted legs is sorting out again the chiefest details. The color of the morning, the texture of the soil, the sharp, hopeless height of the stubble. The polar bear, wide as a door, rises rampant within a roped-off lawn, beyond which reptilians whisper their innocuous venom into the ears of the unfallen, each an additional line. Wolverine and wildcat, badger and moose, partridge and quail and caribou. Beside a barrel of unmarked, untapped beer, the thick mane of a North American bison falls like an unfilled flag. And say that once begun, it must continue, the next-door neighbor's Siamese, always about to flick its right front paw into that softest spot on the snowbird's belly. While Ole himself, greasing the gray of his apron with the fat of his hands, explains to a novice the difference between the trap shooter and the skeet, but all the time thinking how much better that stranger at the end of the bar would look if only his ears had curled to points, if only his skin were fit for shoes, if only his bloodshot eyes were blue like buttons. Ole must have shot everything in North America and Africa, right? And the young people in our group thought it was terrible, but there were times when people did that. Do you remember that, Eloise? And Ole's is still there. The last one I want to read is called Homebody. Across the street in a small gilded basement, an orgy is about to begin. A couple of houses to the south, a gracious and attractive hostess prepares to receive the governor. In her eyes, the little bubbles of a chilled champagne. Not more than 40 paces east of the back porch in the alley, a dull fellow with a sharp blade is yodeling for volunteers. The smell of cash and peanuts and the snap of cards ride a vapor of beer up the street and across the yard and through a crack into the living room window. But I say, no thanks. I say, this is my year for staying in. Besides, I say, I'm smack in the middle of middle age, and I'm reading a book, one that is making me young. 4 children are in it, and a woman. Outlandish how they move and speak and seem to almost give a hoot for one another. The woman, for example, is in her own nightgown, speaking to her husband, who is smack in the middle of the living room, thumbing a book. And the children, more solid than ink, are tumbling out of the pages, their bellies rubbed to a raw delight by a chin of whiskers. What I am saying is that I'm trying to face it. I'm a homebody. Even in my sleep, when I should be squeezing the marrow from whatever fetish most befits me, I discover that the dark lady, lifting her veil and turning seductively to face me, is my own unadorned wife. Bacon and eggs, she says quietly, toast and honey and black coffee. How does that sound for a beginning? Like something right off the color of Sex Illustrated, I say. And I roll over to sleep, the sleep of the undefiled. In my dream, not even so much as dreaming. And that's from Not Such a Bad Place to Be, 1980. And happy birthday, Bill. We'll always remember you.
We have Paul Baker now. He's a friend of mine. He runs a monthly writers series over at Gratitude Bakery on the third Saturday, I believe, is it?
Fourth Saturday.
Fourth Saturday. Okay, well, I got them there a week early. They can just hang around, right?
That's true.
So, Paul Baker.
Thank you, Rex. Even though I grew up in Lincoln, I moved away and lived most of my adult life elsewhere, most notably San Francisco and Santa Fe. I came back 4 years ago and fortunately ran into Rex, and he has educated me about some of our wonderful Nebraska writers that I missed. One of those writers, of course, is William Kloefkorn. The past 24 hours, I took a crash course in Bill's writing. I read 3 complete books of poetry, and from those 3 books, I selected the poems that really affected me. And so I'm going to read them for you tonight. The first one is called Back Then, from his book, Sunrise, Dayglow, Sunset, Moon. Back then, the entire population of my little Kansas town seemed too weary to die. So slowly did time move, from one non-moving instant to another. It was simple. If time didn't pass, nothing happens. If no one dies, and inertia becomes synonymous with fatigue. Tubert Cook, too fat maybe to move, spent most of his life sitting on a green slatted bench in front of the pool hall, tired to the very edge of death from doing nothing. To watch him whittling on a stick with a dull Barlow, without looking at the stick, was to become a part of aimlessness, futility, to a slowness so slow that when it stopped, the stopping made no discernible difference. We buried Tubert, and the beat, such as it was, went on, and still does, in spite of whatever weariness chance and time devise, in spite of how long each moment sits without moving. As we bend again, then again, to tie, then to untie each lackluster shoe. This is from the same book, and this poem is called Javelin. Not really wanting to throw the javelin, I nonetheless throw it. Look, it's what I can do to avoid last period study hall. Miss Molly Cloud Houston, smiling as if in her dotage, anarchy were the infant miracle she alone gave birth to. So I'm outside, reaping the harvest of not being inside. In lazy increments, I throw the javelin from one end of the gridiron to the other. Nothing is expected from me. What hopes for a championship we harbor lie with the sprinters and the hurdlers. Over the course of 4 uncolored seasons, I'll throw the javelin 10,000 times. Salvage 1 bronze medal. Before I decide whether to give it to the girl with the yellow sweater I'll tie it to the end of the string that hangs above the quilt on my bed of stone. Pull it, and the light comes on. Pull it, and the light goes off. This next poem is called Dancing in the Cornfield, and this is from his book, Going Out, Coming Back. Blame it on Porky Holland, that obese rule breaker who got caught smoking in the cloakroom. So for a month of Saturday nights, there'll be no dancing at the center, meaning that each couple will have to find its own private place. Mavis and I choose Clarence Bonham's cornfield. We go there at dusk, giving ourselves plenty of time to inhale the impending harvest. Plenty of time to touch the silk on the tassels, and to ooh and ah at the height of the stalks, and ears the size of a grown boy's forearm. And before the first cloud begins to obscure the moon, already Mavis is barefoot and dancing. So I play something snappy on the jukebox that isn't there and join her. And you should be here to see us dancing in the cornfield, dancing in old Clarence Bonham's cornfield. And when the rain moves in, I change the record to something slow. And we're dancing slowly in the cornfield. Slowly together, dancing in the cornfield. Our bodies, like the tallest corn stalks, swaying. And when we kiss, wet lip to lip, our love and all our secrets, as if kernels of golden corn spill over and down, kernels too many for mortals like us to count on the dark and ever-softening ground. One more, and this is actually, this one is a little close to home, you know, from hearing Bill's son play the banjo tonight, because one of the songs he played comes up in this poem. This is called Wildwood, Early Autumn. And in parentheses it says, for Robert and Kate. This night, above stars sparkling the water, I sit alone at the pond's grassy edge, waiting for the line suddenly to lose its slack. Channel catfish, sleek as love, in a slant of a mid-September moon. And don't breathe a word of this to anyone, but what I'm hearing is the music that came to me so many nights ago, as I sat with the children's mother on the front porch, banjo and guitar and mandolin, taking turns in the hands of the younger son. Each chord sweet as amber wine we sipped on. And don't breathe a word of this to anyone, but the liquid in those tunes must have found its way to where the desert wants to be more than anything else to bloom. Peaceful, easy feeling, blackberry blossom, autumn leaves, devil's dream. Comes a time, red-haired boy, steam-powered aeroplane, refreshing each rib refreshing each rib on each up and coming spine. And, don't breathe a word of this to anyone, but the catch is this: the melodies of the earth are never done. Bullfrog, thunderbird, a west wind slewing through the saguaro, and the fish I'll hook, but not possess. Its body, sleek as love. The night, forever at home, wherever home is. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jack.
Well, we missed a big booming voice, and Paul Baker filled in somewhat. It's hard to match Bill Kloefkorn, but at the same time, we're always glad when someone steps up to the plate and takes a big swing at it. That's a great one. Thanks, Paul. Third person up tonight is my friend Terrence Oberst. He's been our benediction man. He is the guy that has ended up every night of our evening at Mojave. Tonight he gets to be on a little early, so he gets to help out with a few poems here. You got 2 or 3? Something like that? 2. 2 poems, Terrence Oberst.
Thank you. Bill joined our workshop 3 or 4 times over the years. He was a wonderful, wonderful human being. This is our 9th anthology of Writers on the Edge that comes out in just about every year from the Esther Community Center Writing Workshop. And our 9th one was devoted to Bill. And I have 2 quotes, very short quotes, that kind of show Bill's sense of humor. The first one is, "The job of state poet is a good one, because there are no official duties to which you do nothing, no strings attached." And this is even better. It's, "The state capital and I are the same age, although no one is going to spend $1.8 million to restore me." So there are 2 poems. One is by my friend, one of mine. So this is Jill's poem. It's a very beautiful poem. It's called "A Damn Fine Poet." Friday, 9 a.m., I'm preparing for work. Usual coffee, indecision to shower or not to. Shower mated with what color of scrubs to wear for work. Listening to NPR's Fridays at the Mill. All motion ceased when William Steiber announced that our beloved state poet, William Kloefkorn, had passed away. I say passed on because his words will always inspire me. His big presence, his resonating voice echoes in the Indian cave of my writer's spirit. I have a file full of pictures, poems, notes from interviews, all about Bill. His poetry and humorous prose define the inner and outer worlds he explored. His great love for Nebraska, the sandhills, prairie, and the arts. We sat humbled by his words, captured, enraptured, disciples at the master's feet. And whenever writers at workshops timidly presented their carefully wrapped words for Bill's blessing, they held their breath, and then Bill would say, "Why, that's a damn fine poem." But Bill himself was a damn fine poet. Wherever he read on Fridays at the Mill, he chose the fresh poetry of students, young writers, new writers, sons and daughters of farmers. The day he passed, NPR played a tape of Bill reading his New Year's Eve poem about celebration and sitting round the kitchen table, swirling wine and clinking glasses with his wife Eloise, and as always, drinking in deep thoughts. We will miss you, but on a hot, humid Nebraska night, when lightning arcs across dark skies, perhaps a little too close, yet inspiring awe, we'll recall the smooth, low thunder of your voice. Thank you. And that was for Jill, and that was for our beautiful friend, Bill. And this is my poem. Just to set it up just a bit, it makes some comparisons between Virgil's Aeneid and Bill's work, and there are two words. One is moles, M-O-L-E-S, which means a heavy undertaking, and pietas, which is the duty to one that duty is owed. So it's simply called On the Death of William Kloefkorn. I heard of your sad demise from a phone call. An old friend in the early morning, right before I left to go swimming at the YM. You joined myself and the rest of our workshop some 3 years ago, robust and seeming so youthful, patient and kind, speaking with the authority of being a well-seasoned poet, critiquing our individual works through the spectrum of 60 years evoking poetry like magic in the air. And as I swam, I called to mind certain parallels between Virgil's Aeneid and your corpus, how Aeneas founded Rome through a great molus, a heavy task or difficult burden, where your molus was compiling the compendium of the selected poems, nearly 500 pages of sheer lyrical beauty. I remember that last public reading some 5 months ago in the basement of the Nebraska bookstore. There were 20 or so of us attending this christening of the selected poems. Your voice was still vibrant, but to use that old biblical cliche, the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. I helped to change your oxygen tank, and you graciously signed my book. I whispered, "Please, Bill, get well so you can join us again." And you managed to smile, hadn't lost your sense of humor, however self-deprecating as usual, quoting your publisher, continuing in a tongue-in-cheek way, "We can't publish it if it's over 500 pages. I thought, what a hoot. This old guy still has some kick in the ass left yet. Now my mind drifts back to the Aeneid, where Aeneas journeys to the underworld to visit the ghost of his father Anchises, who counsels the would-be Romans to, quote, spare the defeated submissive and battle down the proud. And isn't that what you have done in all your poetic personas? Stood up for the proverbial little guy, whether loony or Ludi Jr. or stalker, or to bring to closure with, little peckerhead, he says, prove it, prove it, prove it, prove it. Those who have no other voice than the one you've given them. Finally, Aeneas is distinguished for his pietas, one's duty and proper behavior toward all those to whom duty is owed. His as a leader, a father, a son, and a founder of a new people. Yours crowned with the Nebraska State Poet for over 30 years. How Aeneas and you somehow blend together, not really able to tell one apart from another. His pietas becoming your pietas. The pietas we all owe you, dearest Bill. The pietas we still owe. Thank you.
Now, of course, on any particular Thursday night, there are those that have obligations and they can't make it. I sent a note to Allie Kloefkorn, and I have a piece here that she wrote. This is her letter to her grandpa. Like my grandfather, Bill Kloefkorn, I write poems. And though I could spend a lengthy amount of time talking about the effects of his kindness, good humor, and love, simply of life, I am going to talk instead about his influence on me as a writer, the depths of which I have only recently come to understand and appreciate. In the fourth installment of his memoir, Breathing in the Fullness of Time, my grandfather writes about the first reading the poetry that he had ever heard of Gary Gildner, specifically a poem titled First Practice. Of the characters in the poem, my grandfather wrote, they had the aura and texture of my own coach and doctor, and probably of countless other coaches and doctors in small-town America. I know these men. I know them by the back. Until he read Gildner's poetry, he said, it had not occurred to me that my experience might provide grist for the poetry mill. Unlike my grandfather, I, without really thinking about it, never doubted the value of my own experience as grist for the poetry mill because I had him. I saw people I knew, quite literally in his poems, my grandmother, aunts and uncles, cousins. He wrote about the Wesleyan campus and floating down the Loup River, his gritty childhood and marrying my grandmother. Anything you found in his life you could find in his poetry. Because of him, poetry was always a perfectly valid way for me to reflect on and attempt to understand the world and the strange fact of my existence in it. It was never stuffy, never too highbrow. Poetry and life were always tightly woven together. And so, playing softball at age 12, when I felt the need to articulate just how wind-whipped my t-shirt against my back and worried to freedom strands of hair from under my hat, I wrote a poem. When a few years later my father's cousin, Bill's nephew, died an untimely death and I was stuck on the look of him lying in the coffin, I wrote a poem. Now, don't misunderstand me. These were dreadful poems, scrawled out in one sitting and never looked at again. I knew nothing yet about form, sound, or economy in poetry. But I will say this about my young self. I was never afraid to write about my life, and I largely owe that fearlessness, that faith, to my grandfather. He knew and taught me in some roundabout way that I am still trying to trace, that the essence of life does not lie beyond, but deeply within it, within the seemingly mundane happenings of which our lives are made. I think this knowledge is where his best piece of advice comes from. Pay attention. Always pay attention. It is by this advice that I try every day to write and to live. Thank you, Rex Walton, for inviting me to be a part of this celebration. To my grandpa, we love you, we miss you, and happy goddamn birthday. It's right there. She put it in there. That's from... You can see the spunk and fire is, multi-generational. That's just the way it works. So, without further ado, how about Marge Saiser? You ready to go? Marge Saiser will come up.
Hi, everybody. Wonderful letter by Allie. Rex mentioned stories. Bill had a lot of stories, and we put some of them in Road Trip. My friend Shelley Clark and I had this idea to publish stories and interviews and work by writers who teach. And we went first to Bill trying out our idea, and he was enthusiastic. One of my favorite views of him is in his ball cap. I know you can't see it, so I'll tell you. He's wearing a ball cap. He's holding a rock. And another one, he's in the classroom at Wesleyan. I spent a lot of time in those classrooms with Bill teaching, and also at UNL in the summer in his summer workshops. Well, in this picture, for some reason, he's got one arm in the air like this, and the student next to him is Ben Gotschall, who you'll be hearing from later tonight. You didn't know that, did you, Bill? Ben Gotschall. You didn't know that, but great teacher. And he talks about his teacher, one of his teachers in high school English. Bill told the teacher that he didn't really think it was worth it to be in class. And her answer and how they, she was really an influence on his writing. So that's a cool story. A story about how his grandfather required him to spell Chautauqua, and he was little, and that was, spell it. And a story about Miss Yoder, who read The Last of the Mohicans 20 minutes a day. Took a year to read The Last of the Mohicans. And I'll read that. Last of the Mohicans. Each morning, to start things off, Miss Yoder read to us from a book so thick I could not stop watching it. Read to us a story of capture and of flight, and then of capture. Each morning her voice going suddenly silent at a moment when something awful, or maybe something terribly sweet, was about to happen. And that's the way I have come to live the other parts of my life. My eyes on a book whose thickness almost imperceptibly lessens. She had read the story Praise Be and Alas so many times before. And when one morning she wasn't there, and thereafter never was, how I expected her substitute to carry on, though she never did. That unfinished book gone forever, with Miss Yoder herself a mystery unfinished. Though day by day I have come to realize the romantic extremities of capture and of flight and then of capture, of taking up what someone else began, however incidental or deliberate, however thick the volume we must alone conclude, however thin. And this is also one of my favorite pictures, collage. And I thought I would read some from Still Life Moving, which is a book that Bill did with Carlos Fry. Close friends, Carlos an artist. So the beautiful thing of having the art, Carlos on one side and Bill's poem on the other, and every poem begins with a quote. This poem deals with his sister and with the cafe that his parents ran. The quote is, "Be dutiful, respectful, gentle, and modest, my daughter, and proud walking." Advice to a young Sioux girl upon her becoming a woman. This quote is in These Were the Snows by Mari Sandos. Bill's poem is called Proud. And he continues with that advice. Be dutiful, respectful, gentle, modest, my daughter, and proud walking. And this also. No people goes down until their women are weak and dishonored or dead upon the ground. And I remember watching my sister, dutiful, respectful, gentle, and modest, and proud walking, as she cleared the counter in my parents' cafe, cups in one hand, plates stacked halfway to heaven in the other. Watched her balance these towers of porcelain all the way to the kitchen, her body certain and upright. And so newly woman, it made me remarkably proud to watch it. My own body too young to know, beyond feeling, what bodies might do when the time comes for doing. Death and dishonor not possible in my parents' cafe, where my sister cleared the counter, and where, returning from the kitchen and wiping her hands on a sky blue apron, she winked as a mother might wink at a child, at her unleavened brother. I'll close with this one from that same book. The artwork is a woman with white hair. on hair and the combing of hair. Bending, and this is the quote by Gladys Cardiff, "Bending, I bow my head and lay my head upon her hair, combing, and think how women do this for each other." And then Bill's poem. "Here is the story my late friend Mary told me. Story of hair and of the combing of hair. How her mother's last request was this: would you comb my hair? And she combed it. Mary said, its whiteness combed into a compliance so soft to the touch that she touched it again and again. And her mother with her bird-frail fingers reached to touch it also. And at the touch, her mother smiled, she said, and that was it. Hair and the combing of hair and the touching of hair with the tips of one's fingers. And that was the story my late friend Mary told me."
Ben Gotschall, are you ready? I know you're ready. You've been ready for years, man. He just needs a little time to walk up front.
Well, this is great to be back at Mojave. Haven't been here in a while. So much of my time with Bill as a teacher and friend was spent here. I don't think you could have gone to Wesleyan without spending at least a little bit of time here at Mojave. I'm going to give Bill the first word here. I'm going to read a fun poem. I think it's fun for this time of year. It's called Otoe County in Nebraska. I don't know if any of you have been there, but I think it's applicable to lots of counties in Nebraska. Incidentally, I married a girl from Otoe County. Tomorrow we'll be married for 2 years. So I just thought Otoe County, why not? On the run is the Otoe County corn rootworm, overcome by laboratories who have purpled the soil with nuggets enough to deter the deepest scavenger. Thus, as you drive the plush, curvaceous trails of Otoe County, you can sense the rootworm's grim retreat, the dirty little no-good crop-killing bugger hightailing it for Kansas and Oklahoma, for South Texas, through Mexico, to a tip in Yucatan from which it can throw itself for mercy into the sea. You can imagine it going without breakfast, halfway now across the Caribbean, dog paddling its 100,000 legs to maintain a slim distance between its life's little juice and the laboratories that, running at full throttle with periscope up, cannot unlock their hatches until that last little juice has been spilled. Meanwhile, back in Otoe County, the cornrows rise, corpulent as green trees. In a red Volkswagen, you are a snail, hunched and alien and terribly humble. Bill was a pretty humble person. He was one of those people that's and maybe Eloise wouldn't agree with this, but he was so humble it was almost humiliating. He almost felt like this guy should boast more. The next two poems I'm going to read, the first one will be one that I wrote, and the last one will be one that a friend of mine, Sam Rankin, wrote, who lives in Georgia. But Sam and I took Bill Kloefkorn's poetry class, one of the last poetry classes he taught, with some other folks that are here tonight, actually. And then Sam and I both went off to grad school and things like that, and both of us ended up continuing with poetry and teaching poetry later. But I would argue that neither one of us would have done that had it not been for Bill. There were times I know there was a time when I was at grad school where I was wondering if it was all worth it and thinking about coming back and going back to the ranch and all that. And Bill said, well, he said, you know, we got a lot of ranchers already in Nebraska. He said, we also have a fair amount of poets, but he said we don't have a lot of people that can do both. And so I stuck it out.
Amen, amen.
And so this is a poem that I wrote because I ended up kind of doing both, I guess you might say. This one's called Sunday Morning. It's got an epigraph from poem number 29 from Alvin Turner as Farmer. And the epigraph is, "Oh, brothers and sisters, the meaning is all here, here in the barn and the milk." The Jersey, not startled by my waking her, regards me with the same doe-eyed indifference she would any day of rest. The other cows rise and stretch, bones of their backs creaking, beds of matted grass, dry hollows in dew as they drop manure and line out, head to tail, up the sloping hoof-packed trail along the plum thicket's edge. I lean against an elm and light my pipe, ritual of smoke passed while the herd stops to water at the hilltop trough. When again they resume their walk along the lane, the sun has risen over slopes of emergent corn. Far-off city lights dim amid gray shapes of buildings, the Capitol's golden dome standing above them like a pope. I turn away, follow cows to the barn, where the small dog awaits supplication, this chore sacred even unto her. The final teat stripped, last drops purged, any spilled dog licked clean, I spray the barn floor spotless and draw myself a tin cup of cool milk, its color pure symbol. From the north, the monastery bells echo across the hills. The cows loaf, eyes half-lidded in sun, ears twitching one by one to flick lazy flies. I tip the cup to my lips and drink it dry. Sam Rankin sends his regrets that he could not make it here from Atlanta tonight. But I told him I would read a poem for him, so I'm going to do that. Give him the last word. So we're going to switch from Sunday to Good Friday. This poem is called Good Friday Reading, and it's for and after Bill Kloefkorn by Sam Rankin from his first book, which Bill wrote the foreword for. The man who never knew anyone who is not a poet held me again, captive and throat thick, holding back the best tears, full of beautiful impossibility. And you keep doing it to me, all the long week before Easter, when I read and reread, drinking the tin cup dry, knowing the channel cat's smooth belly, the thick effluvium of Kansas and Nebraska, the peckerheads and troublemongers, the way you watched with your binoculars, as you say, familiar now as a loose necktie, Halley's Comet. This is the same faint racing light I watched cross the black western sky as a boy, knowing if I were man enough to survive, I would see it again, with all the long years stacked between my life and its desperate arc around the expanding universe. I read your poem for Nicole Ann one day after she is born and talked on public radio with two poets so cryptic in verse that I am lost to their words, let alone the intended meanings. I don't call them dolts or hard-ons, but they know nothing of silage, of young lovers holding the day away together. They know nothing of the way a landlubber digs spade-smooth caves, have never felt the rock and chalk, the jayhawk just a bird, their loop lady nothing like a river. On Good Friday, reading in the Buick while my wife buys eggs of pastel and candy to fill them, and my firstborn sleeps in the back seat, son, I inhale your verse and listen to jazz, soft and cyclical, on the same Wyoming public radio station. The music stops, and the news is of pirates off Somalia's coast and tornadoes in Texas. I wonder who it was that last held these poems, the person who was to return them to the library on the second to last day of December in 1998, when I was about to be in your far-reaching classroom, learning to call myself a poet because you did. I wonder if that reader was writing into a rising sun, breathing deep the stars other dogs forget to look for. The radio host announces the suction was so powerful the shoes were ripped from some women's feet. And I know, no matter how it happened, that sounds about right.
That gives you some small idea, some very small infinitesimal idea of what would happen when you walked into Bill Kloefkorn's classroom. I know one of the exercises in writing they had, which came up kind of spontaneously because of what somebody was saying in the back of the room, and it was either Ben or Sam told me about it. Somebody said, well, you know, we were downtown and the truck went by and there was like a shitload of watermelons in there. And Bill said, well, our next writing assignment is for you to define what is a shitload. So that's what Bill assigned him, and I think from what I've heard, it's almost legendary. Some of the best poems of that semester showed up because they were encouraged. They were like spurred on pretty hard to write something, you know, pretty darn funny. At the same time, he wanted something more than that. He wanted some sense to it. He wanted some nonsense to it. He wanted some rhymes, some rhythm, some motion. That all happens with that's a shitload of things to think about. So you must keep that in mind. Bill was not reverent, he was not irreverent, he was just Bill. And so anything could be a subject for a poem. And John Damaris is not here tonight, but Lucy Adkins is here, and Twyla is here. So after Lucy reads, can I have Twyla come up and say a few things? That would be appropriate too. Lucy Adkins.
Thanks, Rex. It's great to be here tonight, remembering Bill and hearing some of his wonderful poetry. I grew up in Nebraska, was gone for a long time, and when I came back, I think the fires of poetry were kind of banked in me, but I needed to get them to try to flare up again. And I went to the library, and one of the books I got was this one, Alvin Turner as Farmer. And I fell in love with this book. I thought, these poems are real. I thought, these poems are written about people I know, and I think that started a fire in me. So I just want to read 3 or maybe 4 of these poems in here that are really my favorites. And I will start with this one. And these poems, of course, are persona poems with Bill as a poet taking on the persona of a farmer living in Kansas, struggling against all the things farmers struggle with and experiencing some of all the joys. And let's just let's just start and let me read them. This is Alvin. This morning I am dizzy with the plump evidence of fall. The granary is full. The bucket at the cistern glints its use. The baby is solid as a tractor lug. In the kitchen, Martha glows fuller than her cook stove's fire. I want a dozen pancakes, ma'am, a ton of sausage, half a crate of eggs, some oatmeal, and a loaf of toast. Feed me, woman, then kindly step back. I intend to do some pretty damn fancy whistling while I slop the hogs. You gotta love a man that talks like that. And then here's another part of Alvin. He says, I am a dirt farmer who dreams of poetry. Is that so strange? Is anything? I have bent myself thankfully over the heat of cow chips. With the Lespedeza flowers, I breathe its blooms. The calf I winch to birth grows legs like oaks to graze on, and stuck hogs bleed for breakfast. This morning at milking, I kissed the cow's warm flank, and she kicked the milk to froth between my knees. I forgave her, then cried with the cats. Now the manure is in bloom. Thistles defend the driveway, and corn cribs gird the mud beneath my boots. Plotting harvests, I roam my acreage like a sweet spy. In this book, there are a lot of poems that he writes to his wife, to Alvin's wife, Martha. And one time I asked Bill, because I love, like I say, I love these poems, and I asked Bill if he ever wrote any poems from the point of view of Martha, and he told me, he said, he said, well, I tried, but he said he wasn't very happy with them. He says, why don't you try? So I did, and that was a wonderful permission that he gave to me. Here is a poem about Martha. After a difference, we go together as we fell apart with words. They are clear and clipped and gently strange. And hearing them, I think their sound is like the little noise of needles knitting. Small poem, but good one. And lastly, there are a number of poems in this book that are written in italics. They're a little bit different. It's as if, he is speaking directly to his wife, his neighbors, his boys. In this one, imagine there's a little child, a toddler or a baby maybe, that's fussing, crying perhaps. And this is the voice of Alvin Turner speaking to that child. Hush, little one. That racket in the kitchen is not a new war, or the rattling of dry bones joining at the second coming. It is only your infinite mother with her masher humbling the potatoes. Thank you.
I know I'm putting Twyla on the spot, but she's good at being on the spot, right?
That's right.
That's right.
Thank you. I'm glad I could make it tonight after all. Mojave, perfect place. I first started coming to what they called pancakes in the old days. Anyway, she knows what I'm talking about. Nebraska Wesleyan had mandatory chapel at 10 o'clock on Wednesdays for years and years. There's Pam. And the English department rebelled against that. The English department faculty, I should say, and some other ne'er-do-wells there at Wesleyan. They were fine faculty. What am I saying? But anyway, they decided not to attend chapel. Was anybody a student at Nebraska Wesleyan with mandatory chapel? I figured you guys had, but yeah. And nobody wanted to go to it, but you had to. And so the faculty took off. They would go to breakfast. And the first place they went to breakfast was across the street, catty-cornered at the drugstore. Was it 4-star? It was Schultz. Schultz's Esther was the cook, and oh my gosh. So we sat in this little room and had breakfast, 10 o'clock every Wednesday. A whole slug of people down there. It's a lot of fun. A shitload. Only I don't think that applies to that group because there were only like 3 tables and it was a long table, but we had a lot of fun. And of course, and then that it wasn't mandatory after a while, so we just went ahead and had coffee. When Java came along, it was down the street a little ways, and now it's over here. So anyway, that was my introduction to some of the faculty, most of the faculty that were in the Wesleyan Writers Group. So I would just want to say a little thing about being in a class with Bill. And I was an employee, so I wasn't a student there, but I got to take classes for free as an employee, so I did that. And I took a lot of classes with Bill and Leon and Mary Smith and Leon Satterfield, Mary Smith, and Roger Cunard, who was one of Bill's students. And anyway, a lot of fun that way. I mean, why not? They were free. You know, why wouldn't you do that? But I do remember 2 things about being in the classroom with Bill and a couple different times taking poetry. And he famously would start yodeling and doing the Tarzan call. It was like spontaneous Tarzan call. Yeah. Anybody remember that? Yeah, many times. Yeah. And also learned a little bit about poetry meter from him, but not too much. He didn't get into theory very much, but how Robert Frost's famous poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, is the same meter. He sang it to O Tannenbaum. Yeah. You know, whose woods these are, I think I know. You know, and on.
Keep going, keep going.
I can't sing. We need John Walker to come up here. Or Pam.
Or Pam.
But it's a certain kind of meter with this 2.
Read one of mine. So this is Jill's poem. It's a very beautiful poem. It's called A Damn Fine Poet. Friday, 9 a.m. I'm preparing for work. Usual coffee. Indecision to shower or not to. Shower mated with what color of scrubs to wear for work. Listening to NPR's Fridays at the Mill. All motion ceased when William Steiber announced that our beloved state poet William Kloefkorn had passed away. I say passed on because his words will always inspire me. His big presence, his resonating voice echoes in the Indian cave of my writer's spirit. I have a file full of pictures, poems, notes from interviews, all about Bill. His poetry and humorous prose define the inner and outer worlds he explored. His great love for Nebraska, the sandhills, prairie, and the arts. We sat humbled by his words, captured, enraptured, disciples at the master's feet. And whenever writers at workshops timidly presented their carefully wrapped words for Bill's blessing, they held their breath, and then Bill would say, "Why, that's a damn fine poem." But Bill himself was a damn fine poet. Wherever he read on Fridays at the Mill, he chose the fresh poetry of students, young writers, new writers, sons and daughters of farmers. The day he passed, NPR played a tape of Bill reading his New Year's Eve poem about celebration and sitting round the kitchen table, swirling wine and clinking glasses with his wife Eloise, and as always, drinking in deep thoughts. We will miss you, but on a hot, humid Nebraska night, when lightning arcs across dark skies, perhaps a little too close, yet inspiring awe, we'll recall the smooth, low thunder of your voice.
Thank
was for Jill, and it was for our beautiful friend, Bill. And this is my poem. Just to set it up just a bit, it makes some comparisons between Virgil's Aeneid and Bill's work. And there are two words. One is moles, M-O-L-E-S, which means a heavy undertaking, and pietas, which is the duty to one that duty is owed. So it's simply called On the Death of William Kloefkorn. I heard of your sad demise from a phone call. An old friend in the early morning, right before I left to go swimming at the YM. You joined myself and the rest of our workshop some 3 years ago, robust and seeming so youthful, patient and kind, speaking with the authority of being a well-seasoned poet, critiquing our individual works through the spectrum of 60 years evoking poetry like magic in the air. And as I swam, I called to mind certain parallels between Virgil's Aeneid and your corpus, how Aeneas founded Rome through a great molus, a heavy task or difficult burden, while your molus was compiling the compendium of the selected poems, nearly 500 pages of sheer lyrical beauty. I remember that last public reading some 5 months ago in the basement of the Nebraska bookstore. There were 20 or so of us attending this christening of the selected poems. Your voice was still vibrant, but to use that old biblical cliche, the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. I helped to change your oxygen tank, and you graciously signed my book. I whispered, "Please, Bill, get well so you can join us again." And you managed to smile, hadn't lost your sense of humor, however self-deprecating as usual, quoting your publisher, continuing in a tongue-in-cheek way, "We can't publish it if it's over 500 pages. I thought, what a hoot. This old guy still has some kick in the ass left yet. Now my mind drifts back to the Aeneid, where Aeneas journeys to the underworld to visit the ghost of his father Anchises, who counsels the would-be Romans to, quote, spare the defeated submissive and battle down the proud. And isn't that what you have done in all your poetic personas? Stood up for the proverbial little guy, whether loony or Ludi Jr. or stalker, or to bring to closure with, little peckerhead, he says, prove it, prove it, prove it, prove it. Those who have no other voice than the one you've given them. Finally, Aeneas is distinguished for his pietas, one's duty and proper behavior toward all those to whom duty is owed. His as a leader, a father, a son, and a founder of a new people. Yours crowned with the Nebraska State Poet for over 30 years. How Aeneas and you somehow blend together, not really able to tell one apart from another. His pietas becoming your pietas. The pietas we all owe you, dearest Bill. The pietas we still owe. Thank you.